Okay, good morning, everybody. Are you able to hear? Is the voice okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's get started. Today, we'll look at the instruction set architecture of a computer. So far, we had said that it is an important attribute of a processor, and this is the first thing we need to study. Let's first understand what exactly is the instruction set architecture. Many times in the Viva, if you say that you have done a computer architecture course, possibly the first question is what is a instruction set architecture and why is it important? Let's try to answer what is the instruction set architecture of a processor. A very broad answer is it's the programmer visible part of a processor. The aspects of a processor which the programmer needs to know. Assembly programmer, not the high-level programmer. It is the assembly programmer visible part of a processor. But what exactly does the assembly programmer need to know about the processor? The first thing, of course, is the instruction set. What are the operations that are supported by the processor, or in particular, the opcodes supported by the processor? The instruction format, how are the instructions encoded? The registers, how many registers are there, what are their names? So these are the places where data will be located before operation. The addressing modes, how is the data location specified in an instruction? Whether it is in memory, in the register, etc. How it will be specified, we'll look at that in more detail. Exception handling, the exceptional conditions, what happens if something goes wrong. These 5 possibly are the broad things that a programmer need to know before he can start writing assembly program. In this course, computer architecture part, we will write assembly code in a couple of classes, and at the end, all of you without difficulty should be able to write assembly code. We have already said instruction set architecture is important not only for the programmer who needs to know to be able to program, the processor designer also need to know instruction set architecture, and the design start point for a processor is the instruction set architecture. The hardware designer first understands the instruction set architecture and based on that carries out the hardware design. This is the big picture. The instruction set architecture is the starting point based on which the compilers etc. are written, and the requirements based on that the algorithms are written, and then these are translated to specific programming language like C, and the focus here is problem, how to solve the problem. On the other hand, on the hardware side, instruction set architecture is the starting point, but here based on the instruction set architecture, first design the microarchitecture, how many caches, what is the, is it pipelined, how many floating point units, how many arithmetic units, etc. And then do the gate level design, and based on that do the circuit level design, and finally the physical layout on a semiconductor. So on the hardware, the main focus is performance. On the software side, the focus is on solving the problem. Anybody any question? Srikanth, any question? Okay. So there are several instruction set architectures. The SPARC architecture, MIPS architecture, ARM architecture, the Intel 86 architecture, IS64 architecture. But then in some respects they are similar. We'll just look at one of that. Now let's look at how the instruction set architectures have evolved. This will give us some insight into the instruction set architecture and how the present design has come about. Long back, 1953, the IBM 700 series computer and the Manchester Mark I computer, they were accumulator architecture. This is the ancient architecture. Here, one of the operand has to be in a special register called the accumulator. If you ask why they did that, okay, I don't know really why they did that, but it was clear to them that that's the way it has to be done, that one of the operand has to be an accumulator, then only the arithmetic units can use that operand. So before the arithmetic units, addition, etc. can be done, one of the operands has to be in the accumulator. And then the stack architecture and the general purpose register architecture came about. In the stack architecture, namely the HP computers were prominent users of the stack architecture. But the general purpose register architecture, these were a generalization of the accumulator architecture. Here the operand can be in any of the register. That's why the general purpose register, each register can be the accumulator. And slowly, 1980s. Anybody has any question? In 1980s, the CISC or the complex instruction set architecture, they came about. Here, large number of instructions with various addressing modes, about 1,000 opcodes in this CISC architecture, and about 3 or 4 dozens of addressing modes. But then later, as you were saying, one of the landmark was the RISC architecture, the reduced instruction set computer in 1980s. And then Intel was in a difficult situation because all their processors were CISC, Intel 386, etc. And we were telling the other day that once your processor is using CISC, becomes very difficult for you to change the processor set, the instruction set altogether. And we had said that, see, the main reason is that if the programs have been written, they are running, and you bring out a new processor, those old programs don't run on that because those opcodes are no more supported, those addressing modes are no more supported, then nobody is going to buy your processor. And Intel was in a very difficult situation. They wanted to go for RISC, but they could not because of this legacy issue that they were already in the CISC. So what do they do? Pentium, Core i5, i7, etc. They are outwardly CISC, inside RISC. That means the instruction set is still CISC, complex instruction set computer, but inside they translate the CISC into RISC in the hardware. In an advanced course that I was mentioning, we discussed this in detail, but here we just know that this is what happens in the Intel computers. We will not have that much time to discuss how they do, etc. But let's look at the instruction sets. The different types of instruction sets are, we will see that there are about 3 or 4. We have already seen that there are 3-4 different types of instruction set architectures. And the main difference is that how do they store the operands before they can be processed? if you look at an instruction, an assembly instruction, there will be opcode. Sorry, there are some.
জমা দিলে নতুন ফর্ম নতুন অ্যাপ্লিকেশন করলো আর বলে হবে
Saptarshi Mandal. Saptarshi Mandal, please mute yourself. So those who are doing other things, please mute yourself. Otherwise, it's disturbing the class. Okay, we're just seeing the different sets of the instruction sets, starting with accumulator, stack, general purpose register, CISC and RISC, and the outwardly CISC inside RISC. We will see examples of this. And we are saying that if you look at an assembly instruction, there is an opcode here. The opcode is add, and then there are operands. One is the destination, R1 is the destination, and R2, R3 are the operands. These are used, R2 and R3 are added, and the results are produced in R1. Now, there are three major choices by which the operands can be stored before they are processed. One is a stack, one is accumulator, and one is a set of registers. This is the general purpose registers. What is the stack architecture? In the stack architecture, there is a stack internally in the CPU, and the operands have to be there on the top of the stack. The operand, the operation, the add, etc., they will pick out the number of operands required from the top of the stack. Add requires 2 operands. It will pick up the 2 topmost elements on the stack architecture. It will be popped, and they will be operated on, and the result will be produced on the stack again. On the other hand, in the accumulator architecture, one operand has to be in the accumulator, and the other can be in another register. Both the stack and the accumulator architecture once upon a time were very popular, but now obsolete. What is the problem? What is the problem with the accumulator architecture and the stack architecture? Why suddenly they vanished? Can anybody answer this? What is the problem with accumulator architecture?
Some memory wastage.
Sorry, please tell your name. Gaurang, right?
Yes, sir.
Gaurang, what's your answer?
Some memory wastage.
How can you explain how memory is wasted?
So because you have to store the operand also.
Anyway, you have to store the operand before you can operate. It has to be there somewhere, right? So I don't think that's the right answer. Can anybody else? So
maybe access time.
Anybody like to answer?
Sir, is it access time?
Mohsin, right?
Yes, sir.
Mohsin, sorry, that's not the answer. Anybody else?
Sir, one time only one operation can be done.
Can you elaborate your answer? Jhansi, right?
Yes, sir.
Can you elaborate your answer?
What I meant is at one time only either addition or like only one execution can be done.
Yes,
like in
that's the
stack.
way the processors worked actually. That at a time, those days, you could do only one at a time. Only recently we have multi-core. But in multi-core also, each core you can do only one operation. So
Okay.
I don't think that's the right answer.
Sir,
Anybody
is
else?
it
Sir, the original operand can be lost. Like when any operation is performed and means when an accumulator fetches when data and performs an addition or subtraction, the original value can be lost. So we have to either store it in another register.
See, the result is stored here. Let's say add R1, R2, R3. So okay. So if one is the accumulator, you first copy it to the accumulator, and there the result again comes, right? So it is not that it is lost.
So a lot of memory operations are needed to perform basic instructions compared to
okay,
if we had more registers.
This is Archit, right? Archit.
Yes, sir.
See, the thing is closed, but see here, extra operations have to be done, not memory operation. Extra operations or instructions has to be executed to bring the operand into the accumulator. If it is a general purpose register, wherever it is there, you can just execute it. So it is inefficient. The accumulator architecture is inefficient because each time you have to bring the operand to the accumulator. If it is there in another register, that will not do. You have to bring it to the accumulator and again carry out the result, store it somewhere else each time for every instruction. And that's a huge wastage. It is really nice that if it takes operand from any register, wherever it is, and produces the result in any required register. So that way you save a lot of operations, and that's why the accumulator architecture is no more used. Now let's look at comparison of these architectures. In the stack architecture, you have operations like push, A, B, these are the operands, and implicitly the ARD will take the top of the stack and produce the result. And the result will be in C, and then the result will be on the top of stack, then you get that into C. To get C equal to A plus B, you first push AB into the stack, do the ARD, and then pop the result into C from the stack. On the accumulator architecture, you have to have one of the operands in the accumulator, then ARD that with B and store in C. In a register memory architecture, one of the operand has to be in register and another in memory. So here you first load register R1 from the memory A, then ARD, one of the operand is in R1 and the other is in memory, B is memory and R1 is the register, and the result is produced in R1. And now you store back R1 into C. In a register architecture, which is the one on which we'll focus, the present day architectures are all register. Here, if A and B are two memory locations, we first bring them into two registers and then ARD and the result is produced in a register R3 and then store that back into the memory register C. So here, some more examples are given here. This is the accumulator architecture. If you want to add something, you have to use the accumulator. There is a special register ACC or the accumulator. You have to first bring one of the operand into accumulator and then add A to that. Similarly, the stack architecture, the memory architecture, the register memory architecture, and the register architecture will not spend time here. Now let's look at some more architectural issues before we look into the instruction set architecture in more detail. One important thing to observe for all instruction set architectures is that the instruction length needs to be in multiple sub bytes. If this is the instruction, the one shown here, there is a opcode, and then we have the different addresses where the operands are there. So the instruction length is always in multiples of bytes, 16 byte, 32 byte, etc. So why? Can anybody answer why the instruction length is in multiples of bytes?
Hello.
Yes, can anybody answer this question? Why
So
instruction?
when the program is stored in the memory, that the memory, it is stored in multiples of bytes. That is why.
Not
Like
clear.
if I have a 16-bit memory, I'll have to store that function, like that line of instruction in that memory. So I'll have to use multiple of bytes.
Not very clear. Mainak, not very clear. Now, can anybody answer? Give a clear answer.
Sir,
Why?
sir, basically, instruction lengths when stored in memory can be directly pointed to another memory location if they are in multiple of bytes.
No. Okay. Let me just answer this question.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
So
Yes.
can it be like it would make accessing that? I mean, if it doesn't start from a particular address, suppose it starts from 2 and then it extends up to a particular location, then it would be. I mean, addressing would become very difficult.
Okay. So, well tried, but let me just explain this.
Yes,
That
sir.
could be
you
it
need
could be
to
like
remember.
that.
Sorry, who is answering? Please.
So Varun, so could it be like that ki the instructions could be of variable of fixed length so that we need as few bytes as possible or something like that?
No, Varun, right? But no. See, please listen to the answer. The answer is all computers are byte addressable. And there are some computers, of course, where the address is multiple bytes, but the minimum thing that you can access is a byte. If you get something from memory, it is of 1 byte or 8 bits, right? Byte addressable. That's the meaning of byte addressable, is that you get 8 bits at a time. On one read operation from the memory, you get 8 bits. Now let's say you want to store in your instruction length is 9 bits. So you will have to do 2 operations, 2 read operations to get it. And for 1 bit, you have to do 1. So it becomes very inefficient. So the answer here is that why instruction length needs to be in multiples of bytes is that all the less than a byte. So we need to have the instruction in multiple of bytes. Now, the encoding of the instruction can be variable or fixed. In a variable encoding, some easy instructions, those who take only register operands and simple operations, they may take just 2 bytes. And more complex, those where you need to give immediate data, jump to different memory locations, etc. You have to specify the address, memory address, and so on. They can take larger number of bytes. Variable encoding, as the name says, of the instruction varies from one instruction type to another instruction type. The fixed encoding, which is used in modern computers, is the size of all instructions is the same. Now, why is fixed encoding is being used? What is wrong with the variable encoding? The main problem is that to read an instruction, before you can process, the processor has to fetch the instruction. But how much does it fetch? Does it fetch 2 bytes? Does it fetch 3 bytes, 4 bytes? It depends on the instruction type in a variable encoding. And it has to first look at the opcode, then determine how much to fetch, what will be the size of instruction, then fetch. So the complexity of decoding, first decode the opcode, then find out what is its size, then fetch rest and so on, it becomes very inefficient. Whereas a fixed encoding, each instruction is size, let's say 2 byte or 4 byte, it just gets that directly and decodes that. So almost every processor now uses fixed encoding. Now let's look at the next concept here, is the addressing mode of an operand. Somebody may ask you this question. If he knows that you've done a computer architecture course, say, what do you mean by addressing mode of an operand? To give a very short answer is that the addressing mode of an operand denotes how the location of the operand is specified. Is it in the memory? Is it in the register, etc.? Or is it consecutive addresses of an array, consecutive elements of an array? So the addressing mode denotes how the location of the operand is specified. Just look at these 3 instructions. In the first instruction, the operands are register names actually. We call it as the register direct or the register addressing mode. In the second one, we load the contents of a memory location. 1000 is the memory location. We load that into register R1. So this is the memory direct. Whatever is there in 1000, we store that in R1. Look at the third one. Load R1 and within bracket R2. So what it means is that the address of the memory location is there in R2. So there is an indirection happening here, that we are in the R2, we are storing the memory address and using that address to fetch from memory. And this is called as the memory indirect addressing. 1000 is the direct addressing, and the first one is the register addressing, or sometimes it is called as the register direct addressing. So this is the most used addressing mode. See, each processor will support number of addressing modes. Why does it need to support number of addressing modes? Because depending on the program that we are writing, for different constructs, like whether we are accessing elements of an array consecutively, are we just adding 2 numbers, etc. So depending on that, we will use different addressing modes. We will be writing programs, assembly programs, to know how these happen. And it's not a great deal actually. Assembly programming looks intimidating, but after 3-4 classes, you will say that no, there is nothing too much. If we know, we can easily write assembly program for any given program, any given problem, we can write the assembly code. This is the most used addressing mode, is the register addressing. The operands are there in the register R2, R3, and the result is produced in R1. So the operands are register addresses. This is also called as register direct address. The memory direct address, sometimes also called, AKA, is also called as, also known as absolute address. In the memory direct address, the address is directly given as part of the instruction. 1000 is the memory location, and whatever is there in 1000, it is brought into R1. See, 1000 is not brought into R1, but what is stored in the location 1000, that is brought into R1. The third addressing mode is register indirect address. Here, the address of the memory location is stored in the register. So there is an indirection. We first go to the register, find out the address of the memory location, and then read that memory location and get that to R1. So this is the register indirect address. And then the fourth important addressing mode is the indexed addressing. It's also called as the displacement addressing. It is specified in this form: 100 within bracket R2 is the register. So here 100 is the displacement. If we have an array starting at 100, to access the successive elements of the array, we will initially store R2 as 0, then we'll increment R2, keep on incrementing R2, and here 100 plus 5 will be fetched into R1, and next time we increment R2 to 1, then 101 will be fetched, etc., etc. So this is indexed, or the displacement mode is very convenient to do operations. R2 is called as the base register and 100 is called as the offset, used for accessing elements of an array successively. It becomes very simple if you use the indexed mode. There is another one which is the immediate mode. We have the opcode here ADDI, which says add immediate. By add immediate, we have given here 3 operands. 2 are register operands. The third one is an immediate operand. An immediate means that itself is the operand. 4 is the operand. So it means that we add 4 to the contents of R2 and store the result in R1. The immediate mode is very popular when we use constants in programming. The last type of addressing mode that we will discuss is the PC relative addressing. We say J4, jump to 4. What does it mean? It jump relative to the current location of the program counter. So if the program counter value is 1000, it will start operating or fetching the next instruction from 1004. Now let's do a small exercise here. Let's say this is the code. See, later in another 2, 3 or 4 classes, we'll be able to write assembly code for much larger, more complicated program. Let's do for a very simple program here. It's a C program, int I, sum equal to 0. And for I equal to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus, sum equal to sum plus I. So basically, we are incrementing sum, adding 1 to 10 and incrementing, accumulating the result in the sum. Now, what are the addressing modes that will be used in various instructions? Right now, we have not yet discussed about what are the opcodes and how to write the assembly code, etc. So I don't really expect you to be able to write the program, but at least the addressing modes. Now, what is the addressing mode used in the first one? See, subtract R1, R1, R1 means R1 is subtracted from R1 and stored in R1. So basically R1 is initialized to 0 here. What is the addressing mode here used? Is the register direct. Now move 10 to R3. 10 is the immediate address. So it is immediate addressing used. Load sum into R2. So this is memory direct addressing. And then we add R1 and R2 and store the result in R2. and then, so here register direct addressing, and then increment R1. So we add one constant 1 to R1, so immediate addressing. And then this is the loop which is set up here. Branch not equal to, if R1 is not equal to R3, that is still it is less than 10, then branch to loop. So this PC relative addressing. So just to write a small program like this, we had to use various types of addressing in this. Right now, don't worry, we have not yet discussed how to write the assembly code, but in a class or two, we'll be able to write this kind of code. Now let's see, how do we encode an instruction? Consider a simple instruction like add R2 and R3. These are the two operands, and the result is produced in R1. How will it be encoded? The ARD is the opcode here. So the opcode part will be stored here. And then there are operands here. OP1, OP2, OP3. These are the three operands. R2, R3 are here, and R1 is in OP1. But what is the size of the opcode? It is determined by the total number of opcodes supported. Let's say we have 40 opcodes, 40 different types of instructions. So what is the size of the opcode? What is the, how many bits we need to encode the opcode? We have 40 different types of opcodes. Yes, anybody like to answer? Six. Very good. 6. Because 40, so even though it is 64, we still can have more opcode. But then for 40, we need to minimum number of bit required is 6. Similarly, if we have 16 registers, let's say we only do register operation. If we have 3 registers to be specified, let's say R1, R2, R3. So for each register specification, how many bits we need? We have 16 registers in our processor. 4 bits, right? So for each register, so 4 bit here, OP3, 4 bit OP2, so 12 bit gone. The opcode took 6 bits, so 18 bits is the minimum length of the instruction. But then remember that we have various types of addressing modes. We had mentioned about 4 or 5 types of addressing modes. So that also we need to encode. So the instruction size will be slightly larger. But for the simple addressing, that we have only 3 register operands and only 40 operations, we need 6 bit for the opcode and 4 bit for each of the operands. So 4 into 3 is 12 plus 6 is 18 bits. But then there has to be in the multiple of bytes. So we need 3 bytes. So that's the answer here. The size of the instruction here for this simple computer will be, each instruction has to be 3 bytes. Now before we look further into the instruction set architecture, we need to answer one very fundamental question. That what is the difference between a single cycle processor, single cycle data path processor, and a multi-cycle data path processor? Somebody may ask you this same question someday. What is a single cycle processor and a multi-cycle processor? Now let's look at the answer. Don't really expect that somebody will be able to answer, but if you can answer, it will be really great. But then the next question you will ask is that which is better? Should we go for a single cycle processor or a multi-cycle processor? And if you say that either way, single cycle or multi-cycle, you'll ask why. Please justify. Why did you say single cycle or multi-cycle? In a single cycle processor, each instruction is completed in a single cycle. Let me repeat that. In a single cycle data path processor, each instruction completes in one single cycle. There are 4 instructions here and the execution completes exactly in 4 cycles. But these instructions are different types. One is add, another maybe compare something with something, another is some jump to something, etc., etc. These are different types of instruction. So these instructions take different amount of computation. Instruction 1 only takes a small fraction of the cycle. Instruction 2 takes nearly the full cycle. Instruction 3 takes very less, and so on. On the other hand, in a multi-cycle computer, each instruction takes some multiple of cycles. Instruction 1 takes 3 cycles, instruction 2 takes 5 cycles, instruction 3 takes 3 cycles, instruction 4 takes 4 cycles. So, which one is advantageous? Okay, if we want to compute very fast, we need to use a multi-cycle processor, because here wastage is very less. Otherwise, the instruction takes very less computation, but still we have to wait till the end of the cycle. But the implementation will be slightly more complicated in a multi-cycle processor, even though it is much more faster, but still the implementation is slightly more involved. The hardware design is slightly more involved. We'll see that as we proceed in this course. So this fundamental thing, I hope it is clear that a single cycle processor is simple to design and each instruction completes in exactly one cycle. A multi-cycle, each instruction takes multiple sub-cycle, but some take 3 cycles, some take 2 cycles, some take 5 cycles, etc. Single cycle data path wastes time for different types of instruction. Multi-cycle instructions take different time, but here it is time efficient, but control circuit design is more complex. Now let's look at another very important thing in discussion about architecture is the RISC-CISC controversy. And after that, we'll look at the instruction sets. These are 2 different types of philosophy in instruction set architecture design. One is called the CISC. The full form for CISC is complex instruction set computer. And the full form for RISC is reduced instruction set computer. As we were mentioning, that the CISC was initially very popular. The main characteristic of a CISC processor is that large number of instructions, thousands, 2,000-3,000. VAX 780 had some nearly 3,000 instructions. Some are very simple instructions, some are very complex instructions. For example, some instructions in VAX, you could do string manipulation to check whether one string is a substring of another string, compare 2 strings, which is if they're equal, etc. That were possible in the VAX computer. So those were complex instructions. Some were very simple instruction like just addition of 2 integers. And also the addressing modes supported were many. I was saying some 2-3 dozens of addressing modes. And the complex instruction set computers had orthogonal addressing. That means every opcode you can use various types of addressing in those. For example, in ARD, you can have all 3 register operands, the 2 source operand and 1 destination operand, all a register. You can have 2 memory operands and 1 register. You can have all 3 memory operands and so on. So that's called as orthogonal addressing. And naturally, there is a large variation of cycles per instruction, because some are very complex instructions, some are very simple instruction. 1 to 14 cycles for Intel 86. Instruction lengths are also variable, 1 to 12 bytes. No wonder, because you have to do string operations and so on. Typically small number of registers, because the control circuitry here is so large, it takes most of the chip area. Decoding the instruction is very difficult. And also the control circuit, like when to do what operation, the data to be brought to the register, added, produced, next one is, it's very difficult. And therefore the control circuit size is huge, takes most of the chip, 80% of the chip area goes in control circuit. And very small number of registers we could implement, because most are gone into the control circuit. We had something called as a micro-coded control. The control itself had a program stored, executed, and so on. So that's called as micro-program control, and pipelining was not possible. But then we are telling about the story that Intel, even with its CISC architecture, started doing pipeline on the CISC processor itself and got some benefit, and that's how it really outmaneuvered Motorola, etc., who fell back. Motorola Semiconductor division became bankrupt, and then they had the new competitor in the form of AMD. But then they could not go far in pipelining the CISC processor. They had to make it externally CISC, internally RISC. Finally, internally it operates like a RISC computer, and therefore pipeline could be used efficiently. It will become clear why we are giving this statement that CISC inefficient pipelining. Please think about it as we proceed. We'll explain this. Now, why did they do this? Why this large number of instructions, complex addressing mode? What was the rationale behind this? The main reason is that that time the size of the processor was, the number of transistors available on the processors were less, the memory was very less, and therefore the program size was one constraint. The size of the program those days was one of the important metric of a good program. If your size is, let's say, 10 kilobytes or 5 kilobytes, that matters. If it is 5 kilobyte you have written the program, then you are a good programmer. If you took 100 kilobyte, then they will say that is not a good programmer. And if two numbers could be directly fetched from the memory, see, in one instruction, you could, the size of the number of instructions is important, right? So if you could write only 100 instruction and your program works, you are a good programmer, and the processor will work fast. And therefore, each instruction will have memory operands. In the same instruction, data will be fetched from memory, operated, and results stored back in the memory directly. That was the requirement. So these are memory operands. A, B are memory locations. A, B are added and results stored in C. And that's why we had large number of operations, and the philosophy was that doing anything in hardware is much better, much faster than writing program for that. For example, string comparison, or finding whether a string is a substring. If you write a code, it may take 20 lines or 30 lines of program. And if you can do that in one line of instruction, then it will run very fast because it will be done in hardware. That was the idea. But in 1984, they analyzed that, see, you have these 2,000-3,000 of instruction. In a typical program, how many of those instructions are used? Surprising result that only 20% of the instructions are used in a program. So if you have 1,000 types of instructions, only 200 are used to some extent. The others are not at all used. They are used in some very odd programs. So the main philosophy was implementing commonly used instruction in hardware holds performance benefit. Hardware string manipulation will be much faster than writing the code for that and comparing character by character and finding the string comparison. And for that, many versions of the same instructions were supported. As you were saying, that it can have two register operands, source operand, and the destination is register. Two destination source operands are register and destination is memory. Two memory operands, source operands, and the destination is register, etc., etc. Look at the addressing scene here. Direct, register indirect, indexed, scaled, auto increment, auto decrement, memory direct, indirect, etc., many more. We'll not really look at all these addressing modes because we are not going to use them in this course. But then this is how it used to be. This is the Intel 86. These are the 12 addressing modes, and for each addressing modes you have various types of operands and also various addressing various sizes of instructions. You can have 1 byte to 12 byte, and first few bytes contain opcode, mode specifier, and register field, and the rest are the displacement and immediate data. But then how come that in 1 year, 1984, suddenly they said that, see, what you have been doing till now is bad and RISC is good? Is it that those who designed processor before 1984 were all morons, idiots who didn't know how to design a processor? They designed the CISC processor. Or is it that CISC is a historical blunder? So today we are at the end of this class, and we'll have the next quiz on next Monday. I think that will be more convenient on next Monday. So that is today's 18. So 25th we'll have the next quiz, and Thursday we'll just discuss about this CISC, and then we'll start discussing about the instruction sets. We'll stop here. Any questions anybody has? Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, please. Yes.
So the reason you mentioned why this was bad, because the instructions that were carried by the hardware were not usually used, right? Means the convention, they are not most more used, right?
Yes. See, the reason is that many instructions, the philosophy was that if you can even do sorting, searching, etc., you had one instruction to do sort, one instruction to do search, etc. Better do it in hardware. You just have one instruction per sort. Why write the program per sort? Why write the program per search? Because they will take a lot of code, and that will take memory space, and memory space is very less, and better do it in hardware. So that was one of the reason. So, but then how many times do you use those operations? Only once or twice. And do you really need to have a hardware to do sorting and searching? So that was the question. But why? What happened after that? RISC, they said that you reduce the instructions, but what way did the benefit and how much did the benefit? That's the question that we are going to address in the next class.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll stop here.